Hello songwriter friends, today let's take a look at Defying Gravity from Wicked and try to figure out why it is one of the most iconic tunes ever to come from Broadway. It feels like you can walk up to almost anyone and mention Wicked and they will burst into some rendition of Why is it so powerful? I never saw Wicked. All I knew was there were a couple witches on a billboard and a vague allusion to the Wizard of Oz, and yet I knew I loved the song, I knew I found it powerful and beautiful. So why? How can it have so much clout, even for people who don't know anything about the story? A lot of YouTube videos go into the motivic structure based on the Wizard of Oz and Over the Rainbow and talking about sort of the clever intellectualisms that Mr. Schwartz used to bring those themes in as part of why the music's so strong, but I don't really buy that, to be honest. I think that those are interesting, but I don't think they account for why the song is so powerful. So I'd like to break it down from a music theory point of view and take a look at the melody and the chord structures and everything leading up to it and see if we can figure out why this song seems to stand on its own as one of the most beautiful pieces to come from Broadway. The first thing I want you to notice is how simple the melody itself actually is. Almost the entire melody is based off a D-flat major triad. Now we're in D-flat major, so that's just the home chord of the key, okay? And most of the melody, so you throw in a couple E-flats here too, but otherwise it's... right? So mostly just the notes of this triad. Now when you're first taking voice lessons, one of the first things you learn how to do is sing up and down a major triad, like Zach will show us here. Point being that singing on the triad is like a relatively easy thing to do, an easy thing to remember. And so I want to argue that this is part of the reason this melody is so accessible, so memorable, so easy and appealing to sing, because the melody itself is actually very simple, okay? The only other note in the melody is this E-flat. And E-flat is just a note one above your tonic. Three blind mice, blind mice. So that note's pretty easy to sing to. It's just the note, it's the almost home note before you get home. Okay, so almost home, 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 almost home, home. Okay, so it's a simple melodic structure. Now, one interesting thing about this is that often melodies outline the harmonies that are beneath them. So if we were to guess what the chords were in this melody, we might guess that it was mostly sung over a D-flat major triad. Okay, the only other note is this E-flat, and because the E-flat is in this melody kind of the almost home note, that's got a 5-1 feel to it. Almost home chord to all the way home chord. So I think we could assume, especially since the melody starts out A-flat, E-flat, the first chord would be, and then the rest of it would just be D-flat. Which doesn't sound bad, honestly, right? So the melody all by itself, with the chords that seem to be implied, is an appealing melody, right? We'll talk about the rhythmic elements later. Let's take a closer look at the chords that were actually used and see what Mr. Schwartz was up to with the harmonies he chose to go underneath the simple melody to express what he's trying to express with this song. Okay, so instead of going from A-flat to D-flat and singing the whole thing over D-flat, the first thing we're going to do is go from A-flat, we're going to overshoot the D-flat and go to B-flat. Okay, it's a really powerful moment. It's the first moment when she starts to float and to fly and to feel her power instead of being kind of stuck on the ground. Okay, if we went to D-flat, we'd be going down a fifth as we expected. We'd be going from 5 to 1, dominant to tonic, okay, A-flat to D-flat. And this would represent kind of the ground. The ground is where you expect it to be. You come home from a long trip, you take off your shoes, put your feet on the carpet, scrunch your toes, right? Very sense of being on the ground. Instead of that, we're going to overshoot and play this note, which is below the ground. It's lower than we thought it was going to be, and it gives us this dramatic feeling. And I think that dramatic feeling comes because we suddenly feel like the ground has fallen out from beneath us, and we're kind of floating and falling. We're in uncertainty now, okay? Instead of certainty, we're in this uncertainty because the ground's not where we expected it to be. Okay, now, technically what we're doing here from a music theory point of view is a deceptive cadence. If you want to sound like a nerd, you can explain that this way. Instead of going 5 to 1, we're going 5 to the minor 6. That's called the deceptive cadence, and it gets used for centuries throughout classical music to do exactly this. You think you're going to be here, and instead we take you off on a side quest, a little emotional journey instead. Part of the reason a deceptive cadence works so well is because the 6 minor chord has 2 notes from the tonic triad in it, the D-flat major chord, okay? So instead of going here, we take these two notes and keep them, and we move this note down here. Okay, so that's part of the reason a deceptive cadence sounds so cool and works so well, is you're just changing one note, the A flat to the B flat. Okay, but I think in the context of the song, the reason it works so well is that sense of the ground falling away from you. Okay, so that's the first dramatic moment. The next two melody notes are going to be the F and the A flat. Now, please note, this is still from the D flat major triad, right? If you were going to guess the chord through this whole melody, you would be playing a D flat major triad. But instead of that, when we get to the A flat, we're going to play it over a G flat. Now this represents the 4 chord, okay? So it's not like a fancy chord. D flat would be 1, 4, 5, minor 6. Okay, so we're playing it over the G flat. But isn't that a beautiful feeling you get there? That's a major ninth. Major ninths get used all the time to create this exact sort of wistful feeling. Andrew Lloyd Webber uses them all the time in his melodies. Okay, so part of the reason it's so wistful is because it feels like you're yearning for something. And what you're yearning for is for it to resolve down a step to the octave. Okay, G flat to G flat is an octave. That's 8 steps. One more is a ninth. So that's why we call this a ninth. Now ninth, this may sound beautiful when it's spread out like this, but if you play them right next to each other, it's actually a very dissonant interval. Now we like the dissonance when it's spread out, but it's still technically a dissonance that our ear would prefer to have it resolve down like that. Okay, so we're going to call this kind of a suspension, right? It's an example of feeling like you're floating, using music theory to make you feel like you're floating. Okay, so that's what he does on that note. Let's look at the rest of the melody. So the next two notes are the D flat and F, again notes from the D flat major triad. We're going to sing this one over an A flat. Now this one to me sounds expectant. It's not quite as beautiful as this ninth, it's not quite as emotional, but it's definitely makes you feel like you're waiting for something. And again, the thing your ear is waiting for is to go down a note to the E flat. Why is that? Well, you're essentially hearing an A flat triad here, A flat major triad. So to sing an F over that creates this dissonance. And you want to hear that come down to the E flat. Okay, so again, we're singing the melody note from a D flat major triad over bass notes that make you feel suspended, not quite finished, like you want to come down a note, which is exactly what the melody does there. Okay, right? So just to recap, the melody does this. The ground falls away from you. You feel like you're floating, and then you feel like you're floating, and then it finally comes down. And only at the very end do we get these closing notes, and we finally play over an actual D flat. And boy do we have 4 octaves again to give us this really strong sense that we are on the ground. Okay, with that anxious rhythm again, we'll talk about later in the video. So, I argue that the chords are absolutely brilliantly, cleanly, and effectively designed to give you the sense of what she's experiencing, which is this kind of unexpected feeling of floating and not falling and being able to fly. Okay, let's take a look at the music leading up to this section, which I think is equally brilliant. Not everybody knows it as well as the kind of worldwide familiarity with that main melody, but I think it is really brilliant too, to give a real oomph to this moment in the song. So let's take a look at how that works. But there's something very triumphant about the arrival when you get to that leap. Now there are a few elements that contribute to a big sense of arrival. One is the left-hand bass line rising. Time to trust my instincts, close my eyes and leap, right? That gives you a big sense of arrival. One of them is the grand pause there, to close my eyes and leap. Okay, and then even the chord itself starts on a sus4, right? Instead of getting a major triad, you get this little half step above. So there's a sense of anticipating arrival to get there, and all those things contribute to a big arrival before arguably the biggest moment in the musical. So that's all cool. But there's something else to it. It's almost like I expected this A flat to be minor, and the majorness of it was a surprise. So I brought this to my music mentors, and they were like, I don't know, dude, like, it's D flat, that's the key you're in, A flat major is supposed to be major, it's a dominant, I don't really hear the minor thing. It's like, okay. But I went back up the page and realized something really cool. So if we go to the top of the page, the rules of someone else's game. It's a really big sounding chord, right? There's a few reasons it sounds so big. One of them is the left hand's doing this, and you kind of expect to go from 3 to 4 to 5. And instead of that, instead of a step, you go a fourth. That's a much bigger, more energetic interval, so it sounds like this sudden big energy. Also, you're going to a note that's not in the scale. This is a flat 7. In D flat, the notes are D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C natural to D flat, okay? There's no C flat, okay? It would be like if you were in C major, you'd be playing all white notes on the scale, and you expect to hear B to C, this half step, right? Ti, do, and instead of that, you would play a B flat, which really stands out, right? It definitely doesn't belong in the scale as our ears are tuned to hearing. So it's going to be a surprise. So something is important is happening right there. And it's even reflected in the lyrics, right? She says, who's of someone else's game? So it's almost like she's tired of playing by the rules of someone else's game. She's going to introduce her own game, her own rules now. And it happens right on that flat 7. All right. Flat 7s are interesting. Why would he introduce a flat 7 there? Well, one of the things about a flat 7 is that it produces a major chord, which is one full step below the tonic. Okay. So now you have a major chord that's one step below a major chord of your tonic. Okay. Now that's a very conspicuous sound. Having two major chords right next to each other tells the ear something important. And let me show you what I mean. If we go to C major again, the chords we're going to play are C major, then we get two minor chords, D minor and E minor, 2 and 3. Then we get two major chords, F and G. Okay, that's your 4 and 5. We get a minor 6, a diminished 7, back to the 1. So in the whole scale, the only place we get two major chords next to each other are 4 and 5. And we're so trained to hear 4 and 5 going to 1 that when we hear that, we tend to think we're hearing 4 and 5 and that we have a different tonal center. The tonal center is now going to be here. Okay, so when you introduce a flat 7, you're kind of making this illusion that the tonal center of the piece has changed, that you're in a new key, that there's a different home key than there was before. So let's play through it. We get to someone else. There's a flat 7, okay. Too late for second guessing. There's your D flat, your tonic. There's your C, your flat 7 again. Let me ask you a question. If I do this now, does that kind of sound like we're home all of a sudden? It does to me, and that's because of that 4 or 5 thing. Now G flat, for the moment, kind of feels like the new tonal center. Kind of feels like we're in G flat. Okay, so what? Why would he do that? Well, if we're in G flat for a moment, guess what the A flat chord changes to? A minor chord, A flat minor. Okay, it's just like if we were in C major, the D would be a D minor. Okay, so G flat, now the A flat would be minor. Okay, well that's cool. So if we held on to that, then when we finally got to the end, you'd expect A flat minor and an A flat major would be a lift, right? Well, it's a little more complicated than that, because let's see what happens next. So we're doing this, sleep, it's time to trust my instincts, close my eyes. Let me ask you a new question. If I play this chord now, does that sound like home anymore? It doesn't to me. Now it sounds like the 4 chord again. It sounds like we're doing G flat, A flat major to D flat. Okay, so that kind of like puts a hole in my theory that you're expecting to hear an A flat minor there. Yes and no. One thing that's conspicuous is that you don't hear a C natural anywhere on this page till the very end. He holds it back. Check it out. So try to find a C here. Okay, none, right? No, not a C natural or a C flat. So you don't get to tell for sure, even though you kind of feel like you're back in D flat, which is important because the song needs to move on. Your ear is still wondering a little bit whether we're hearing a C natural or a C flat. And he doesn't give it to you at the very end. Even here, it's a sus4. You still aren't hearing a C or a C flat till the very last chord on the page. Okay. So I argue that that's a bit of an auditory illusion to make that A flat feel even bigger on top of all the other things he's doing. He wants you to feel that A flat is this massive a rival, and that's how he's doing it. And I think it's just one more brilliant piece of engineering into what makes this song so great. Let's go all the way back and see how Mr. Schwartz sets up the texture for this song. So this is a song about a woman, Elphaba, who feels ill at ease on the ground and transitions to feeling at home in the sky or in the air. Okay. So we start off with 4 octaves of D flat. I know you can't see my pinky, but the bottom 4 octaves of our tonic on the piano. That's about as well as you can depict the ground as I could think of, right? So But then we have this kind of anxious rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And notice how we skip the downbeat of the next measure. Nothing actually plays in the downbeat. We get to it half a beat ahead of time. Okay, so that's a pretty syncopated and anxious rhythm. And he does it again just to make sure that you know that he meant that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. Even this little figure here, it doesn't fall on the downbeat. It's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, so it's very syncopated and edgy. On top of that, from here, we're landing on the 4 chord, the G flat. And on the one hand, the 4 chord is like a familiar chord, 1, 4, 5 progressions in the major. But on the other hand, 4 is actually the least stable chord in the entire key, even playing chords that aren't in your diatonic collection. Because a fourth is technically a dissonance. Even though it sounds like a perfect interval, bum, 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 if you look from a music physics point of view at the harmonic series, it's actually quite a dissonance. And on top of that, if you go down a fifth from your tonic, you get to the fourth, which means that's the farthest you can get from getting back to the tonic in terms of circle of fifths. So fourth is actually a very unstable place to sit. So it's another way in which she's portraying anxiety about being on the ground. Okay, let's see what happens when she starts singing. You might expect that if a character felt very confident about what she was singing about, that the pulse of her singing would fall on the strong beats of the measure. In 4/4, those strong beats would be 1 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 1 is the strongest and 3 is the second strongest. Let's see what happens when Elphaba starts singing here. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, all but one of those notes fall on the offbeats, other than this 1, 2 and 3 and, but even that is like a glancing neighbor tone. It's not really sitting in that note, right? That's a conspicuous number of notes not to be on the downbeats. That'd be like getting a 0 on a multiple choice test. So I'm pretty sure this was a deliberate choice Mr. Schwartz made to express uncertainty at this point in the song. Okay, very similar in the next measure, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Okay, again, mostly on the weak beats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and. Notice how often she doesn't sing on the downbeat of the measure, the first beat of the measure, right? We're really avoiding that. But in this measure, at least we're singing on 1, 2, 3, 4 and. Okay, so we're on the quarter notes 2, 3, 4 and, but still jumping 4 and, so she's not singing on the downbeat in the next measure, which is the strongest beat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, again singing on the quarter notes, 2, 3, 4 and, but again dodging the first note of the next measure, right? Even though we're going to that flat 7 now, which is like a stronger harmonic stance, still not singing on the downbeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, mostly on the weak beats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So we do sing on a downbeat here, but just barely. Everything else is ands. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, here we start to sing a little more on the quarter notes. 1 and, still not the downbeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, no downbeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, a lot of ands. Okay, here we finally start to sing on the strong beats, but then we have this long pause at the end of the measure. 1 and 2 and 3 and, right? 4 and, only here do we really land on the downbeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Okay, so that's another way in which we're setting up anticipation to make this feel like a big rivals to the rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But even then it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, so this is still an exploratory moment for her where she's first discovering her flight, but she's definitely getting closer to the strong beats as we go. And then we go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, but again, this one's really strong on the downbeat, but then again we jump the downbeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. But this one's pretty strong. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, gravity. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Those are the strong beats of the measure, and she's really hitting hard on those. Okay. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, we're still jumping the downbeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, that's strong and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now this one's interesting. You can't pull me. This is on the 4 and. So on the downbeat, when we get back to this figure, we're actually not singing again. 1, da 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 da. And this is her kind of anxiety space. This is the ground again. So it might make sense that she gets a little bit edgy again right before she gets back to the ground. Dum, bum, 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 bum. This is really anxious rhythm, right? Okay, so I would argue that all these elements contribute to how this whole song builds up to the most magical moment in the song and really portrays what she's going through using the music itself and not borrowing from anything, not even needing the lyrics necessarily. I think the music all by itself tells the story brilliantly. And this is my best analysis as to how that works and why it works so well. So I hope you find this interesting. Thank you very much for watching. And if you have arguments with me, please share them in the comments. I'd love to hear. Thank you.